That's right, 20 years of Media Watch. Well, 19 actually, but more of that later. For 2 decades, my 6 predecessors and I have ridiculed and dissected and exposed Australia's journalists. We provoked irritation, embarrassment and occasionally rage in our targets. And tonight, some of them get a chance to hit back. More importantly, Media Watch has given pleasure to its viewers, who've been enthusiastically tipping us off to the media's stuff-ups and outrages from the beginning. There's nothing quite like Media Watch anywhere else in the world. And certainly Australian television in 1989 had never seen a presenter quite like Stuart Littlemore.
Good evening. This program's Media Watch, The Last Word. Sounds like an MA thesis, doesn't it? And I'm Stuart Littlemore.
Media Watch's real task was to inform the consumers about when they were being lied to, when they were being misled, and when the standards of what they were watching were less than they should have been.
The least respected people in Australia are, it seems,
newspaper journalists
and
car salesmen.
So there.
The ABC had never given a television presenter such license to say what he thought.
One sordid little entrapment too many.
And Littlemore, a journalist turned barrister, seized the opportunity with relish. He was biting.
Their reporter on the story, why do I gag on the word reporter?
And funny.
Without putting too fine a point on it.
They started coming up early this morning.
The reporters don't know it, but there is more to journalism than wetting your pants.
His critics called him pompous and elitist.
Mates no more. Don't presume this network's behind you. You're a loser.
And frequently his victims thought he was downright unfair.
Channel 9 assigned the Bambi story to a reporter who should stick to modelling menswear.
these deer have now been given a stay of execution.
Stuart Littlemore didn't care.
See, what journalists never understood was they thought Media Watch was for them. It wasn't for them, it was about them, and it was for the public.
Monster 7.5-metre croc, say police.
Well, not exactly.
Territory crocodile experts last night did not reject reports that a monster crocodile up to 7.5 metres long had been seen in northern Australia.
Neither did they reject reports that Elvis was with it.
Stuart has an absolutely unique presentation style on television, and it's derived from sort of 2 parts of his character. The first is that he's a natural performer, and the second is he's got an incredibly incisive intellect.
I thought that Littlemore got a bit supercilious, bit holier than thou. I think that Littlemore at times was shooting fish in a bucket when he'd go after little newspapers, almost for typographical errors.
To be truthful, we love the Illawarra Mercury. Tuesday's advertorial was for a garden you can get married in.
The cost is $100 and includes a small marquis.
No one as grand as the Marquis of Queensberry, of course, but they'll throw in a tent at no extra cost.
There's an old show business rule that you've got to have a running gag. And when we started Media Watch, quite a few times in the first few weeks, some stupidity from the Illawarra Mercury thrust itself forward.
When that jewel in the Fairfax crown, I speak of course of the Illawarra Mercury, inserts an ad in their big city cousin, can they spell the name of their town?
Wollongong.
Or their own name?
The Illawarra Mercury.
No, they can't. Why am I not surprised?
Don't forget, words are the trade. Words are what journalism is all about. They are our chisels and screwdrivers. Now, if we use them incorrectly or stupidly or ignorantly, then that's worthy of exposure.
From the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald on Tuesday.
Fury as rangers slaughter park's lovable aliens.
Note the emotion, fury, slaughter and lovable. It sets the tone for Colin Allison's scoop that rangers are ridding the Royal National Park of the remaining 200 exotic deer from a herd introduced to pomify the park last century.
Here you had this story about Bambi and how terrible it was that the authorities were going to cull Bambi and take Bambi out of the park. Trouble is, the story didn't have much weight or persuasiveness once it became known that the person writing the story was a very keen shooter of Bambis.
This is Col in The Sporting Shooter, with a deer he's just killed. And here's Col with a buffalo he's just killed. and some magpie geese he's just killed. And this is Col's gun with some rabbits he's just killed. He calls them bunnies. Col with a donkey he's just killed, and a goat he's just killed, and another buffalo.
Media Watch can show that to the public and say, look, these are less than perfect sources. These are less than perfect people. You are being lied to occasionally. You are being persuaded against logic.
You can go to hell. I'm Darren Hinch.
We know. We know.
He hated my form of journalism because what I was doing on Hinch was personality journalism. He didn't like editorials. A big anniversary of sorts today. 15 years ago today, this man was launched onto an unsuspecting public on radio in Melbourne. Well, I was different, yeah. I had no tie, had a beard, didn't wear beards on television.
It's very hard to take Darren seriously when he says that the reason that we were interested in his performance is because he had a beard.
Consider the focus of his reports, starting at random with the death of the man who invented Scrabble.
I met him, I played Scrabble with him several times, and it prompted this, my first book. Ray Conniff once had an album called Broadway in Rhythm. I know because I bought it.
So we were simply saying, look at this man, look at what he passes off as journalism. It's actually self-obsession.
I have my own code of ethics, and I've gone to jail for 12 days because of them. I'm very comfortable with them, and I'll wear them. We're all fair game. You're in people's living rooms every night, and you're fair game. I mean, you dish it out, you take it. And I say that as a person who got no joy out of being depicted naked in a toilet bowl in one of Larry Pickering's graphic and cruel Christmas calendars.
Particularly in the early days, journalists all over the place, not just Channel 9, were mindful of perhaps winding up on Media Watch. It wasn't a place in those days you really wanted to be.
Tonight, we exposed Christopher Skase as a liar, a cheat and a thug.
Skase wants to get hold of that.
One of Stuart Littlemore's most memorable stories came to be known as Barcelona Tonight. When entrepreneur Christopher Skase's corporate empire collapsed, owing nearly $2 billion, he fled to Spain. Skase's lawyers claimed he was too sick to be sent back to Australia. In 1997, Channel 7's Today Tonight tracked him to the island of Mallorca.
They went there and claimed that they'd been hounded off the island by police or heavies acting on behalf of Skase. Now, it turned out that was complete fabrication.
Lawrence alleges you stole $20 million, you used your family.
For most of our confrontation with Skase, he was smiling. We soon found out why. Roadblocks. Within minutes, Skase had police roadblocks in place. Every car coming from his village to the capital was searched. Get out of here.
This was a classic Media Watch gotcha, and it came from a tip.
And the barrister said, I used to live in Barcelona. I go there frequently. That film was in Barcelona, not Mallorca, and that was just the afternoon peak hour that they were arranging the traffic for.
The background shows this activity to be in the theatre district of Barcelona. You can see theatre names on the buildings. The number plates on the cars are Barcelona plates, and these aren't police roadblocks, but urban guards arranging traffic flow.
Well, I think he, given his time again, he might have used a different location.
That's one of the things that Media Watch, I think, does very well, and that is expose the tradecraft of television and to a lesser extent newspapers, and just show viewers this is how it's done. This is how you're being fooled.
In case you missed the names, those responsible for the item were journalist David Richardson and producer Chris Adams.
A liar, a cheat and a thug.
She was talking about Mr. Skase, of course.
I think, particularly in television, the characteristic styles of the mid-90s were sensationalism, sheer sensationalism, driven usually by prejudice, and intrusions, what people call foot-in-the-door journalism.
It's something of a tradition, maintained, you might think, by Nine's police reporter, Steve Barrett. Here he is at work, getting a photo of the dead man from his widow. The scene is her home. Enter Mr. Barrett.
We need him for the publicity today.
You photographs of Boris?
She's confusing.
Oh, I understand, yes. Mr. Galloway, tie you out. Come on. Have you got photos? Oh, I haven't got any photos. But it's because we need the photographs for general police release. OK?
Could the widow possibly have thought he was a policeman? Surely not. And the respectful hanging back, waiting to be handed a photo? Sure.
Yeah. Right, I'll give those back to you.
I think very few journalists consider the welfare of the people they're interviewing and the consequences of writing the story. I am of the view journalists would sell their own mothers for a story on the front page.
Most journalists would not do that. However, you know, some journalists are, you know, extremely competitive and want to get a story at almost any cost. That's a good thing more than a bad thing.
If you want to pillory people, you're not going to do it to the ones who are articulate and have resources. You're going to pick the poorest, the weakest people in the community, the dole bludgers, the mothers on supporting mother benefit. Those are such easy targets. And it comes as such a shock to the journalists when there is something like Media Watch which can fight on behalf of those people.
They say there's no way off the dole queue.
The future doesn't look that good.
But are they doing enough?
Why do I have to get out of bed? 12:12, get up.
And no one was pilloried more mercilessly during Littlemore's years on Media Watch than the Paxton family.
But Mark, Bindi and Shane Paxton are not here for a holiday.
In segment after segment, Nine's A Current Affair portrayed the Paxtons as dole bludgers extraordinaire. And Littlemore hit back with characteristic savagery.
This week, I want to look at what that pack of nasty bastards at A Current Affair have done to 3 defenceless kids from the western suburbs of Melbourne.
I remember Littlemore going feral with his usual acerbic, dripping vitriol. But, you know, at the end of the day, Stewart does that. That's what Stewart does. So what?
This is not journalism, it's show business. Long-term youth unemployment? How does ACA cover that? Well, by shouting at them, get your hair cut.
So, Shane, would it be worth cutting your hair?
No. I don't want to cut it. I should be. That's not stopping me from doing the work.
I don't care what they say. As long as I know in my heart that what I do is fair and accurate and that I'm not out there to deliberately hurt people, I sleep beautifully.
But I'm just not cutting.
And I don't need to have, you know, Media Watch try and remind me of what they think happened.
Well, this program and Talkback Radio right around Australia has been flooded with calls from angry Australians who believe the Paxtons should now be disqualified from receiving the dole.
Were they exploited? That's an interesting question. They were certainly the stuff of many stories which rated extremely well. Was it a valid story? In my view, yes, it was.
Bullies hunting in packs, the program that stops at nothing. As I said, it's not a pretty sight.
To which of the senses does the word olfactory refer? What? To which of the senses does the word olfactory refer?
Well, if it's an old factory, I suppose it smells.
It's important to understand that Media Watch is a program, it's a show, so it has to be entertaining.
While in Launceston, a defendant was convicted of
possessing a forearm without a licence.
Covering basketball, the Mercury referred to the local teams
succumbing to last year's premiers.
It's like circumcising them, I think.
Please don't get hung up whether it's harassment or harassment. I'd rather you concentrated on what we're talking about tonight rather than the way we pronounce it. It seems either is right.
And don't write in to criticise his pronunciation of either.
It's absolutely vital that Media Watch looks very hard at the ABC because, for a start, Media Watch would have no credibility otherwise. The ABC would have no credibility otherwise.
Well, a short while ago, I spoke to John Lombard and I asked him whether he thinks people power can triumph in the Soviet Union.
It's largely symbolic at the moment because the numbers are really quite small.
But a short time ago, we asked John Lombard if he thought people power could triumph.
Each of the newsreaders pretended to be asking the questions of the reporter in Moscow.
A short time ago, I spoke to John Lombard in Moscow.
It has been enormously effective here outside the Russian parliament.
A Soviet correspondent is still with us.
No, he wasn't. That seemed to me to be a total deception of the audience and exactly what it was that we would not forgive if it were done by a commercial network. So we certainly weren't going to forgive it when it was done by the ABC.
And we kept showing that they were at least as imperfect as everyone else. There was a lot of pressure occasionally, very subtly expressed. No one came round with a sledgehammer and tried to hit us on the head, but there was the odd phone call from the managing director, the odd phone call once from the chairman, and plenty of sort of undercurrent attempts.
And that's all for this year. Thanks for your support and your contributions.
Welcome back to Media Watch. While we've been away, you'll be distressed to discover the world hasn't changed.
I'm going to go in. I happen to know that Ray knows who I am, so I've brought along a disguise.
Richard Ackland, too, upset Auntie when Media Watch ran part of a pilot programme starring comedian John Safran.
Will you please come out, Mr. Martin?
The ABC had decided it should never be shown, following bitter complaints from Nine's megastar Ray Martin.
Australians.
It was a spoof on tabloid tricks.
Whilst you're off at your 9-to-5 job, the work-shy Ray is still lounging around at home. Now, today we're going to find out exactly when Ray decides it's finally time to leave and go to the office. Now, to keep an accurate time of the exact point when he does leave his home, we've brought along our official timekeeper. Shane Paxton, thanks for joining us.
How are we, John?
Remember the Paxtons?
Mark, get up.
How can three young people who say they're desperate for work knock back good jobs in a tropical paradise and still expect to collect the dole?
Well, Shane Paxton was the archetypal, victim of the current affairs show. Now, what time do you have?
We have 9:15 and still no Ray.
9:15, and where, oh where, is Ray? So we thought he represented, the kind of person who gets harangued by the current affair camera crews.
Ray, don't. It's not worth it. Don't. Ray. Yeah, Ray, don't. It's not worth it.
Oh,
you're silly because you reached a... I should be ashamed. I didn't do anything to your family.
I would have done the same, except I don't think I would have missed. I would have made sure I landed one.
Pardon?
What's the joke? What's the joke in walking up my front door? What's the joke in my son goes to school?
It's not so much that I think he acted inappropriately by throttling me and screaming at me. That was totally appropriate. I was really being quite annoying.
My house is a problem. That is not private.
I saw you.
I don't think it was Ray's finest hour. I can understand that he was feeling, upset or invaded. So at a human level, I can understand what happened, but I can also see the viewer's, standpoint that if you're shining light on other people, you can hardly be precious when it's shone on you.
We say goodbye to Ray and leave him to his complaints about intrusive television crews and feral reporters, and to wrestle with his legacy.
They go down to the bank, Uncle Scrooge down there behind the counter hits him with a fee. How can you do that, you people?
Tonight we'll spend a little more time than as usual studying this lion of integrity.
Richard Ackland's biggest scoop, in fact by far the biggest story that Media Watch has broken in its first 20 years, came to be known as cash for comment.
I think people would know that my opinion's not for hire.
If a politician wanted to be accepted by the Sydney electorate, he'd have to win the favour of one or two of the morning radio talkback announcers. The power of Alan Jones and John Laws was almost breathtaking.
There is supposed to be a strict divide between advertising and programming, but advertisers really prefer to be personally endorsed by the dazzling orbs of the airwaves, especially if it's in the form of an editorial. Cash for comment was a whole subterranean world of opinions, views, messages, declamatory statements being offered to the public in exchange for money.
Hello world, this is John Laws.
Well, Anne Connolly had the gruelling and unfortunate job of having to monitor John Law's broadcasts every morning.
What's on your mind, Australia? Tell us, 13 13 32.
I heard him constantly bagging the banks, how evil they were, how many fees they were taking out, the total villains.
So here's how it works. The bank makes $2.2 billion profit. The bank closes branches. The bank loses 2,500 staff. And then they do it all over again.
But then there was this magnificent flip.
You know, we do forget sometimes when we criticise them that banks are made up of people. So there you are. See? Banks make very big profits. But are they unreasonable about it? Maybe not, when you know the whole story.
The shift came after a surprise phone call from the bank's chief lobbyist, Tony Aveling.
Hello? Yeah.
Hello, is that John?
Yeah.
It's Tony Aveling here from the Australian Bankers Association, John.
Hello, Tony. That's a surprise. How are you?
And from then on, the banks were John Law's best friend. There was a whole segment, and at the end of each segment, John Laws had a pithy little saying, which would be something like, "So banks, not so bad after all," or, you know, "Gee, they contribute a lot to charity, don't they?" And it was just marked. You could not... It was incongruous with the stance that he took on everything else, which was, you know, somebody who fought for the battlers.
Now an update on a story we brought you some weeks ago. It concerns that lion of integrity on commercial radio, John Laws. You may remember we charted a remarkable turnaround in Laws' attitude to Australia's banks.
Richard is very well connected to and has got good sources, and a document sort of slipped his way, which actually showed that the change of opinion on air was in fact undersigned by a very hefty $1 million contract.
The objective is to reduce the negative comments about banks by John Laws from the present average of 4 a week to nil, concurrently to receive positive comments from Mr. Laws over and above the paid advertisements, and by doing so to shift Australians' perceptions of and attitudes towards banks.
It was just so blatant, it was beyond belief almost. I remember seeing it, and I saw it in Media Watch, and I thought, my God, that is going too far. That is ridiculous. And it didn't even contemplate that the rest of us might get swept up in it.
After Media Watch received the document which proved how much money John Laws was getting from the banks, the next day it was all over the media. There was a total media frenzy.
Cash for comment has rocked the radio industry like no other scandal.
The program had revealed broadcasters Alan Jones and John Laws had been paid by the banks and Telstra to make favourable comments.
From the banks out there who doesn't want me to keep saying nasty things about you, give us some money.
It just sort of kept unravelling. I mean, after a while, we were totally surprised at the number of clients that had Laws and Jones on the drip.
Now Adelaide broadcaster Jeremy Cordeaux and Perth's Howard Sattler are also under the spotlight.
So you'd start hearing about some other contracts by Alan Jones, Howard Sattler in the West.
Jones and Laws' payments were multiples of mine, but at the end of the day, I guess it put me up on the same sort of pedestal as them.
The investigation concluded 2UE had breached the Broadcasting Services Act 5 times over political issues and found 90 breaches of the commercial codes of practice.
The ABA is also insisting that 2UE keep a register of sponsors for public view. The register must disclose in broad categories how much the presenter is paid by each sponsor.
If Media Watch hadn't led the way, that I doubt Cash for Comment would have ever been exposed. I think it was so ingrained, and I think that some managements were so scared of their stars who were corruptly taking money that they just let it go.
Well, I mean, the Cash for Comment thing disappeared, as well it should, having proved absolutely nothing, except that people like me and Alan Jones actually got paid for working, which might come as a bit of a surprise to people at the ABC, I don't know. But as far as Media Watch itself is concerned, I don't think it ever did any good, ever. It was destructive. It's very easy to be destructive. It's difficult to be constructive. We spent our time doing our best to entertain people. Media Watch seemed to spend its time doing its best to denigrate people, which I find strange. And as for somebody like, was it Richard Ackland? That pompous would-be lawyer, what gives him the right to sit in judgment on people like me that have entertained people all over Australia for 50 years? I don't have the vaguest notion. Where is Richard Ackland now? What contribution has he made to television and radio? I think it was rather a shame that they even thought of doing a program like Media Watch. It wasn't new. I did a similar one back in about 1970 for Channel 9, but it was a funny one. People would send in mistakes in newspapers, like the Queen pissed over the bridge instead of passed over the bridge, and we'd have fun with it. But Media Watch was vicious and I think unfounded.
But the night's top award, the Gold Walkley, went to Media Watch. Their John Law's Cash for Comment story snowballing into one of the biggest controversies.
With his Gold Walkley Award on the mantelpiece, Richard Ackland bowed out at the end of 1999.
Welcome to another 1,000 years of Media Watch. Thanks for joining me in a new millennium where I will be the judge.
Media Watch is a program that goes out, 45 episodes a year. You cannot fill it all the time with cracking good stories. And I think it needs to entertain as well as inform.
I think Paul had a great sense of humour, and, you know, a lot of the segments that we did on Media Watch with Paul were very funny. For example, a little clip from a Brisbane newsreader who was caught on camera calling her husband an arsehole.
This asshole that I'm married to, he goes, oh, I'm going to go skiing, okay, I want to go, you're okay, I want to. And then it's slightly,
Time for the weather now, Mark. Quite a warm day today.
Jeff, it was a corker of a day. The sun was a magnet.
You see, this bastard I work for, he's... are we on... Hello and welcome to Media Watch. And that was Marie-Louise Thiel on Channel 10 in Brisbane with a special message for just one of her viewers.
Well, last night, a part of a conversation taking place here in the studio during a commercial break was broadcast to air. The conversation was lighthearted. It was in no way meant seriously. My husband David and I have a truly wonderful relationship, and I'm very sorry that the comments went to air, and I regret any offence that viewers may have taken from them.
It's my pleasure to introduce to you this afternoon the Managing Director Designate of the ABC, Mr. Jonathan Shire.
At the end of his first, and as it turned out, his only year in the chair, Paul Barry made a very powerful enemy.
I have to say to you,
His boss, Jonathan Shire.
a 3.2% change in funding happens a lot in Australia.
The mood was heated.
From all corners of the state, supporters of the ABC squeezed onto the steps of the Opera House to support their favourite auntie.
ABC Chairman Donald McDonald.
Jonathan Shire had been in the job, making a mess of the ABC for about 5 months. We had not covered the story. It was clearly a story of huge interest to everyone in Australia, but particularly to ABC viewers, particularly to Media Watch viewers.
It is hard to tell whether Shire is more loathed than ridiculed among the 4,000 plus staff he is supposed to be leading.
It's Shire madness.
Shire's speech was at times all but incomprehensible. He was so silly at times yesterday you felt sorry for him.
We asked Jonathan Shire if he'd be interviewed. He said no. We decided to interview the chairman, Donald McDonald, instead. He was, after all, chairman of the board that had appointed Jonathan Shire and was responsible in that way for Shire's performance. Can I read you some of the headlines about Mr. Shire? Sheer or Shire madness, The Age. Shire's ABC vision still a blur.
Tiresome play on words, that one, isn't it?
Yes, but it's a point of view, isn't it? It's one of our major national papers calling the managing director mad, essentially. So it seemed perfectly reasonable to interview McDonald and say, is this guy doing a good job? Look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. How long are you going to tolerate it? When do you decide you've made a mistake? Now, I think that's a perfectly legitimate question to ask him.
People told us that they thought it was a brave program to have done, and maybe it was even foolhardy.
The ABC management was horrified by the interview, and subsequently, my contract was not renewed.
I really hadn't expected that they'd have the guts to cancel the program. And so, you know, after that, I didn't really expect it would come back.
But it did.
September 31, then I'll be leaving, and I wish the corporation every success.
By the end of 2001, Jonathan Shire was on his way out of the ABC, and a new host of Media Watch was on his way in.
Queen Elizabeth I, who died at the weekend, aged 101.
Memo to the Northern Territory News. If Queen Elizabeth I had died the other day, she would have been 468. Hello, and welcome to Media Watch, back from the dead. I'm David Marr.
Terra Australis.
Bin Laden groups in our suburbs.
Don't know what happened to them. Must have got away.
Let's not mince words here. These are racist attacks against ordinary Australian girls carried out by out-of-control Lebanese Muslim gangs.
Opening our doors to a wave of hatred.
Piers Ackerman.
A beard, a scarf, a headdress, or the length of a sleeve or dress are all important to some of these people.
9/11 released a lot of hate and fear into the community, and that was naturally reflected in the press. And one of the things we did a lot of in the following year when Media Watch came back on air was to criticise the excesses of those people who were peddling false stories of fear and hatred.
The Australian's flinty columnist Janet Albrechtsen blames the rapes on Islamic values.
French and Danish experts say perpetrators of gang rape flounder between their parents' Islamic values and society's more liberal democratic values.
Because the culture was led by very ideologically committed individuals, opinion writers and commentators, they're the sort of people who, you know, write their columns angrily, write them off the top of their head, make a lot of mistakes.
Janet put a new word into the lexicon this year, to Albrecht, to lift and twist somebody else's words to support your own argument.
Pack rape of white girls is an initiation rite of passage for a small section of young male Muslim youth, said Jean-Jacques Racial, a psychotherapist at Vitaneuse University.
But he didn't say that. Janet took most of those words from the Times, but she added white and Muslim. They are not Racial's words or his argument, as he angrily confirmed.
May I ask you to make it known that I strongly disassociate myself from the remarks attributed to me which are the opposite of my views.
Outrageous Albrechting like this should be a capital offence, but we still see her face in The Australian.
Like many people on the left, or many lawyers, he found a flaw in her work, and he then used that flaw to extrapolate a wider flaw in her entire argument. Now, I'm not going to argue that there was no flaw in her work, but what I would argue is that it was a fair representation of the Danish research that she was quoting.
He criticised Janet Albrechtsen because she was wrong, because she misused the work of a couple of European academics to pursue her own argument. And those academics, when alerted to what she had written, dissented strongly from her use of their names.
David would argue that Janet Albrechtsen is a cultural warrior, and I think she would say David is.
David Marr is an ideologically driven journalist, and he has a view and an ideology that not all journalists by any stretch agree with.
And look who was there.
John Howard, Bronwyn Bishop, Simon Crean and Pauline Hanson at the Mark War fundraiser.
Media Watch gives its presenters a unique opportunity to pontificate. And too many of the pontificators its critics have always claimed come from the political left.
Hello and welcome to Media Watch. I'm Liz Jackson. I don't think it is a question of left and right wing. I mean, I know that's their view, but I mean, what you want from a Media Watch presenter is someone who is fair.
And I think it's a shame that despite the ABC's commitment to diversity, not one of the 7 hosts that Media Watch has had over the years, not one has been conservative.
And we welcome alternative viewpoints. But Andrew Bolt of the Herald Sun doesn't want a bit part. He wants to star.
And I think really it needs a cultural change. That is an ability, a willingness to, employ, say on Media Watch, for example, not just the David Marr, but for once, a me. But
Is this a job application?
Look, I would be the kind of presenter that Media Watch its traditional audience, and certainly the staff, would gag over it. They would say it's unfair, I'm pursuing an agenda, it's how terrible, I'm biased, and all sorts of terrible things, and it's totally inappropriate. And I'd say to them, why didn't you say the same with David Marr?
And I don't think somebody like Andrew Bolt should host the program. I don't think ideologues should host the program, and my problem with the program is that in the past, left-wing ideologues have hosted the program.
Someone was pulling Reggie's leg and the poor...
There were too many compares from the Sydney Morning Herald. You know, I've worked at Fairfax. It struck me as a particularly sort of odd place. It was full of left-wing journalists who loved to hate the poor.
The only people who really, really couldn't take it was the Australian. The Australian hated it, and they fought back very, very strongly, and they just can't cope with being criticised. Classically, they're the great disher out, and they can't bear being dished.
Marred by private vendettas.
Media Watch shows critics have a point.
A misguided attack.
Watchdog has blinkered vision.
Beat-ups and lies.
No vendetta as Media Watch goes to blazes.
I think the ABC's been accused of being a haven for lefties since way back last century. As far as I'm concerned, it's a figment of some, right-wing coteries' imagination.
Penalty pedigree. Mixed. The only team to win a final on penalties.
Her June column was 36% Fast Company. Her July column was 57% filched from the same source. Piers wasn't only quoting Al-Hilali. Everything he said about him and his views was taken from an Israel Defence Force press release.
We were doing a lot of stories about plagiarism, and we were doing a lot of stories in particular about plagiarism in the Daily Telegraph.
Fridays didn't seem to go by that at a certain point late in the afternoon, when you're in the sort of the busiest time of your day, your facts were and here would be this almost legalistic summons from the powers that be at Media Watch asking us to explain ourselves.
But Campbell, even if I were a secret agent for the dark side, what are you going to do about the failings we've highlighted in your paper? In June, we caught your reporter, Matt Sun, pinching paragraphs for a story on the New South Wales Police. You then sent him to London as the Telly's Cadet of the Year. In July, we caught the Telly pinching material from The Guardian for its guide to the World Cup. Not just stuff about the players, some of it wrong, but trivia about waterfalls and beer.
It was a whole series of sort of these weekly summons to appear before the court of Media Watch that had sort of tipped me over the edge.
Instead of sending us a letter in reply, I went to the front office and there was a little foam esky, and inside it there was a small barramundi.
What the hell is this?
When I sent the barramundi, I was in an absolute rage with Media Watch, and I stomped around the restaurants of Surrey Hills in search of a dead fish to send David Marr.
In mafia culture, the fish means that you are about to join the fishes of the deep.
But the next day, I think, I got a panicked phone call from a friend of mine at Fairfax who said, "Is this a death threat?"
Well, I decided it was too expensive to actually stuff the barramundi and, take it off to a taxidermist, so I just took a photo of it. But it took us a few days to decide this, and by then the barramundi was a little bit stale, so I fed it to my cat.
You responded by sending us that ugly little barramundi, which inspired the Campbell Reid Perpetual Trophy for the brazen recycling of other people's work.
The trophy in my name, with the benefit of sort of water under the bridge, I think was inspired.
Telstra is going to spend an estimated $10 million a year to have its name across Sydney's Stadium Australia and Melbourne's Colonial Stadium. I think in this instance it's Telstra therefore being a good corporate citizen.
By 2004, the furore over cash for comment had died away. Radio talkback hosts now had to declare any personal contracts they had with sponsors every time they mentioned their names on air. But Alan Jones had found a way round that inconvenient rule.
When Jones moved to 2GB, he became part owner of the station. And instead of paying Jones direct, Telstra gave its money to 2GB to sponsor his breakfast show. Alan Jones was clearly spruiking for Telstra on air, and the Australian Communications Authority did an inquiry that let him off the hook. We couldn't believe it. Then we got a phone call that if we went to a certain cafe, there would be, in a pot plant, a report, the earlier report, the report that had nailed Jones.
We uncovered the documents that showed that Cash for Comment hadn't ended with the ABA inquiry. It hadn't ended back in 2000. It was continuing right through the early part of this century.
The December report found, essentially, that Telstra, Jones and Macquarie had found a way around the Cash for Comment rules. That document was important because it showed there was a deep division within the Australian Communications Authority about how to handle Jones. There were those in there who were willing to go in tough and really tell it as it was, but that Jones was being protected. This was the report that had been quashed.
It wasn't written in a balanced, objective way, and I make no criticism of the young officer who wrote it. But it wasn't something which would have stood up to scrutiny. It wasn't my idea to quash it, not at all.
Media Watch had been talking about the Australian Broadcasting Authority and David Flint for a long, long time, but they didn't really nail him until Cash for Comment 2.
I got a phone call to say that there was a very interesting letter, a letter that David Flint had written to Jones.
Dear Alan, you have an extraordinary ability of capturing and enunciating the opinions of the majority on so many issues.
The question whether Media Watch was fair in its treatment of me is neither here nor there. It's all in the past. I mean, they had great fun with me.
This, of course, annoys those who have a different agenda. I suspect it is extremely irritating to them that you do it so well. Keep up your considerable contribution to the widening of our national debates. Sincerely, David.
3 months after that herogram, the ABA convened its first inquiry into Cash for Comment. And guess who sat in the chair that day? David Flint.
All of us have transgressions in our lives, and it's perfectly possible to make a judgment about a person whom you admire. There's no problem at all in that.
But it was the straw. It was the straw that broke that strange camel's back.
The board of the Australian Broadcasting Authority has expressed serious concern about correspondence between its chairman, David Flint, and radio broadcaster Alan Jones.
Publication of the letter left David Flint with no prestige at all. He was just a joke after that. And he had to go.
I propose to stand down from the position of chairman of the ABA. My term was coming to an end, very close to an end. It only had a few months to go. And I realised that what had happened made it difficult. It made it difficult to function properly, and I thought, well, the better thing to do was to leave a few months earlier rather than to prolong it. The media had gone into a feeding frenzy, and when the media...
The chairman of the ABA was a big scalp.
This has got to be a media first.
But Media Watch still championed the underdogs that journalists found such easy targets.
This was a brief moment in private.
A brief moment in private? They're on national TV. Hello, I'm Liz Jackson. Welcome to a new year of Media Watch.
Now to one of the stories I'll have for you on Monday night, and Australia's serial single mum who's had 5 children to 5 different men and pocketed tens of thousands in welfare.
You have to understand that the media does have a lot of power, and the victims of that can be people who otherwise have no ability or very little ability to get any sort of redress. And Media Watch is one of the few ways in which folk who feel that they've been treated poorly, they've been lied about, they've been misrepresented, actually have an avenue of redress.
Listen, I just want to ask you a couple of questions. How many kids have you got?
5.
How many dads have you got?
Oh, I don't do this, thank you. No.
How many, Don?
No.
How many, darling? The woman's name is Marianne, And when we contacted her, she told us reporter David Richardson had never spoken to her before.
I had no idea they were following me, and it was a total ambush.
And we just thought that was a real abuse of the power of a television channel to take someone who is themselves powerless and completely misrepresent their life and their morals and imply that they are a welfare cheat.
Well, there are some people who would think that a couple of mistakes is all right, but not 4.
Okay, that's
What
fine.
do you think?
I've made mistakes, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah?
Yeah, can you please just go?
You don't think it's a burden on the system?
No, I'm working as well.
Centrelink knows that I'm working and the amount I earn from that and child support, and adjusts my benefits accordingly.
It's very easy to appeal to people's, as I say, delight in a sense of righteous indignation, appeal to their prejudices. And the people who do that know that that's precisely what they're doing.
6 Aboriginal children were joyriding in a stolen car which crashed when being chased by police. All were aged between 12 and 15. 3 were killed.
Well, I say, good riddance to bad rubbish. That's 3 less car thieves. I think they're dead, and I think that's good.
And I don't resile from that. The fact that they were Aboriginal wasn't known to me at all at the time, and I didn't even inquire. I didn't think it was part of the scene.
So 15 years later, let's hear what's changed. Does Howard still think it's good news if Aboriginal offenders die?
I bet the Defence Counsel stood up giving all the mitigating circumstances in the world as why he did this crime.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's not on.
Just too soft, mate. Nigger, pull the trigger, as far as I'm concerned.
He said that.
I didn't say that. No, you didn't say that.
He said that.
No, Howard, you didn't say it, but you seemed to think it was pretty funny, and you allowed it to go to air. All talk back at 6PR is on a 10-second delay so that calls like that can be cut off.
At the end of the day, it's funny that the authority decided that I wasn't in breach of any broadcasting rules. Funny how Media Watch didn't report that.
For a broadcasting authority, there are regulations and standards that people have to meet. We're not really about paralleling them. I mean, we're partly about naming and shaming. We're partly about saying, well, look, to your audience, take a look at this and see what you think about it.
Look, I don't think Media Watch has got a clue how half the media works. Certainly radio. They've got absolutely no idea how commercial radio operates. They don't understand the talkback mode, the right of free speech. They don't understand that we are partly there to entertain people, otherwise we don't rate.
In December 2005, an anti-Muslim riot flared on Sydney's Cronulla Beach. When Media Watch returned in 2006 with a new host, Monica Attard targeted Alan Jones's inflammatory broadcasts on 2GB in the days leading up to the riot.
What kind of grubs? Well, I tell you what kind of grubs this lot were. This lot were Middle Eastern grubs.
There we go.
And you're not allowed to say it, but I'm saying it.
The people Alan Jones is talking about were responsible for the assault of 2 lifeguards at Cronulla Beach on December 4th last year. That incident sparked the Cronulla riots. Well, we criticised Alan Jones's coverage because it was blatantly vilification. I don't think you could have heard a clearer example of it.
Quite a few radio presenters, shock jocks over the years, have played that racism card, have sort of toyed with racism, of stirring up those emotions.
Every day for a week, Alan found time to let his listeners air their real or imagined grievances against those men of Middle Eastern appearance.
I've got 2 blooming jobs. What sort of a mug am I? I'm going out to pay the dole for these people who want to blow me up.
That's correct. Well, excellent point. And many people feel that way, Yvonne. Thank you for ringing.
What it does, pandering to those sort of base sentiments, it gives a broadcaster audience. It gives them enormous clout. You have somebody at home drinking their cup of tea saying, yep, that's right, I agree with that.
These are the photographs that shame the so-called safe injecting room in King's Cross. Dozens of syringes spilling from a bin in a public street.
Yes, another successful prosecution by David Pemberthy and the team at the telly.
You know, this was one of those things where Media Watch, they can sometimes be kind of unfunny and kind of guileless, and I always wished that they would maybe just cut you a little bit more slack.
But 2 months later, it seems the photos that prove the case didn't show blood-tainted needles from drug addicts at all. The culprit was a diabetic cat named Trotsky and his owner, who momentarily left a container of the cat's used needles unattended.
You know, I knew that I was, you know, up the creek without a paddle because, you know, armed with all of the facts, the original story was obviously not true.
It is extremely dangerous and it is unfair and it is wrong. It is morally bankrupt because it doesn't give their audience all the information. It doesn't give them fairness. It doesn't give them accuracy. It just delivers a political message.
Well, I don't think it was morally anything. You know, morally bankrupt, yeah. No, look, that is Monica's private view, writ large, and that is the problem with the program a lot of the time, that if you're Monica Radard, if you're David Marr, if you're Liz Jackson, you know, that's the sort of stuff that floats your boat. You love injection rooms, you think they're great, and that, you know, harm minimisation is the way to go. A hell of a lot of people really strongly disagree with that. And the job of the editor of a paper like The Telly is to sort of listen to majority views and reflect them in the paper.
Dolphin killed in mid-air trick.
In recent years, more and more journalism has moved online, and Media Watch's focus has moved with it.
Cher tells Oprah of Tom Cruise affair.
Janet's glad.
I observed many trends in the media landscape during my time at Media Watch. I think the most significant was probably the race to the gutter of the online newspapers. Newspaper mastheads, some normally stayed in print, are online getting down into a world of sleaze, freaks and celebrity gossip.
Lara Bingle nude betrayal row.
Desperate Housewives star Marsha Cross gives birth to twin girls.
Bra wars.
This little piggy's just weird.
Electrifying wrestling.
There are sleazy little buttons on every news website in the world where you can click and you can get a tits and ass gallery. That is true, and I'm not going to deny it. But equally, there are new things that have come around as a result of online that are taking journalism in so many exciting and important new directions.
The Daily Telegraph.
Are these boobs the most ludicrous on the planet?
See the pictures here.
Jodie Marsh showed off her new 32 double Gs at London's Orchid last night.
At the click of a mouse, Sydney's Daily Telegraph can bring us London's Daily Mail and a British model's very large new assets. The wonders of journalism online.
Investigate Zayeta sex leak. Opposition.
Since I took over the Media Watch chair at the beginning of last year, the programme has focused often on what the web is doing to journalism. Many believe that it's threatening the very future of newspapers.
The newspaper format, newspaper platform, however you want to describe it, is a dead duck.
People looking for a car or a house or a job are finding that websites are there 24 hours a day and are easier to search than columns of classified ads.
Basically, what is happening is that newspapers are losing their revenue, their advertising revenue. That revenue pays for journalists. And the less journalists you have, the worse the journalism will be. We'll be having more press release journalism, more journalism, less time for investigations. It's pretty fundamental, actually. It's affecting their business model, and that has to affect their journalism.
Xbox and hookers on Dad's credit card.
And some of what does appear online, even on newspaper websites, isn't journalism at all.
It has appeared on over 2,000 websites, from Topeka, Kansas to Adelaide, Australia. The only problem is, none of it is true. It's a completely made-up yarn. How do I know? I wrote it. It's what I do for a living.
So the very future of journalism is in flux. But I will tell you one thing for sure. The new media, as much as the old, will go on stuffing up. Journalists will go on invading people's privacy and stealing other writers' words. Viewers will go on tipping us off. We'll go on putting the beat-ups and Barneys to air. And our targets will go on hating us. That's Media Watch.
The truth is out there.
Is it a bird? Is it a plane?
Not if the Northern Territory News can help it, it's not.
I'd be seriously surprised if any of the Media Watch staff have ever been any further north than the Manly bloody Corso. You know, I picture them all as a bunch of soy latte drinking, toy poodle owning skivvy wearers.
Apparently Media Watch has got all their little knickers in a twist.
Oh, yes.
Their big granny undies in a twist because they can't believe over at the ABC where they're all wearing the fawn cardigans that we're over here having fun, flashing around some boobs and willies.
Have Kyle and Jackie O been snooping in my drawers?
How'd you like the job? Here at Media Watch, we actively monitor your work. Oh, good luck to you.
By the way, I don't know who watches Media Watch, if you know what I mean.
These boring bloody bureaucrats who wouldn't know a microphone if you shoved it up their ass.
Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened.
Agreed, Alan. That's it for tonight.
Join me again next week.
We hope we'll be back next year on Your ABC.
Till next week, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
You've got to remember that the people who are involved in Media Watch aren't what you'd call the great successes of the world.
I think Media Watch is a wank, and I think it's self-indulgent.
And that's all we have time for, if you see what I mean. Good night.